Christians do in the world. I mean, goodness sakes, turn the other cheek. Give them your cloak as well. Other people look at that and go, that's crazy. You're out of your mind. You're beside yourself. Think of Jesus doing all this healing, and in doing the healing and the helping of others, taking power away from the religious leaders of his time. Wouldn't they look at that and go, he's evil doing these things? That's bad. Bad for them, but it's bad, they would say, so he must be crazy. Now, when you're using God to defeat evil, that shouldn't be crazy. But when the evil being defeated interrupts the power of those in place, people will think you're mad. Being mad, he was using evil, they said, to defeat evil. He was the devil himself trying to defeat evil. He's Beelzebub trying to defeat evil. And of course, Jesus turns that around. And the issue that Jesus lifts up is the means and ends debate. You know, which justifies the other, means or ends, you know that debate, right, in the world? That's what Jesus brings up. He turns it around. And he says, you know, how can the devil defeat the devil? And then it isn't in this translation, but that's where the line comes, a house divided unto itself cannot stand. People think Lincoln wrote that. Jesus wrote that, or said that. Lincoln properly used it in the issues that Lincoln was facing. But again, it's the means ends thing. If you've got a divided house, you can't stand. If you have a united house, you possibly could stand. So Jesus turns the argument around right in front of their face. Now let's look at our society. Oh, we're going to look at society now. Watch out. Okay. And see if we don't live in that same dilemma of the means ends dilemma. And are we then guilty of this unforgivable sin that we're going to talk about later, that Jesus said, this is unforgivable? Let's look at some issues. Some people say if we had more guns in our society, we'd be safer. It hasn't worked, ever, and it probably won't work yet. More guns is using the power and the evil of violence to end violence. That's the devil trying to defeat the devil. Do you see what's being said there? Mm-hmm. Means ends. What we want to find is to have a good means that could produce a good end. Less guns, more safety. But you put that out in the world, you're crazy. You're mad. You're beside yourself. So we need to watch out about these kind of means ends arguments. What about this one? Less health care for people means they will be healthier. It has never worked. It probably won't work yet. But that is the devil trying to defeat the devil. It's less health care trying to create more health. It's not going to work. It's backwards. More health care, more health. It works. It has worked in the past. It probably will work in the future. But those who propose more health care, they're crazy. They're beside themselves, is a nice way to say it. Let's do something just general. More war will create peace. Evil trying to do good. Less war, more peace. Good with a good outcome. That seems to be pretty clear for most people, right? But proposing the ending of war and making war illegal in the world, you are crazy. You're beside yourself. So I ask you, when you deal with the means-ends thing in all sorts of debates, realize that Jesus tried to define this the way it ought to be defined. That good means will create a good outcome. The power of God in our story healed people. Good means good ends. And that's what we want to have. But Jesus said those that turn that around, meaning using evil or calling it evil when you're doing good, or, calling it evil means that you're trying to do something good. Jesus said that's the unforgivable sin. Jesus said it's an unforgivable. Does that sound right? Does that sound like Jesus? That there's an unforgivable sin? Now, a lot of people want to attribute that line to Mark, who, in his zealotry for writing the first gospel, was beside himself. Most of the scholars think that's a mistake, that Jesus said this was this was an unforgivable sin. But when you look at it, it's not the kind of sin against God. It's a psychological defect. It's something in human nature that we have to overcome. Forgiveness won't work on that. Forgiveness won't just change your psychological outlook on the means-ends debate. You've got to really retrain yourself to do that. And that maybe is why Jesus said it's not forgivable, because it's a psychological problem, not a theological problem. Now, on calling good means and that will have an evil end, like here you had Jesus with God's power healing people. And they were looking at that as saying, what is he doing and the means, and they don't match up. We have some of that in our society too. Think of this. LGBTQ, equal marriage rights. Good. It will destroy the institution of marriage. How many have gotten a divorce because gay people got married? I want to see that statistic. Civil rights. Let's have civil rights for people. Oh, you're trying to give people special rights. What? What? We live in that means-ends debate all the time. And Jesus tried to turn it around, saying, I'm using good for a good end. A good means for a good end. That's what we should strive to do. But when Jesus calls it the unforgivable sin, let's go to the Bible again and see if that maybe was a Markian mistake. And we go to our Hebrew scriptures, the ones that were read today. Now, again, today, in the Hebrew scriptures, it says, but with you, Yahweh, is forgiveness. Now, in other translations, it reads, with you, God, there is plenteous redemption. And then people would start interpreting what plenteous meant. They'd have a difficulty with plenteous. Some of them thought it meant that there was an amount of specific forgivenesses that God had. If you had plenteous forgiveness, there might be a list of specific forgivenesses. And some things got forgiven better or less or more or something else. Different weights of forgiveness or different kinds of forgiveness. And some things got forgiven and some things didn't. But then other interpreters want you to understand that plenteous means abundant. Means more than is needed. Abundant redemption, or properly translated, abundant forgiveness. There is not a limit to God's forgiveness. And that's why you have such reverence for God in the midst of the way we live our lives. For we think about abundant forgiveness, not just for the big sins, like, murder or rape or war, or, big sin. But for the countless tiny sins every day of unkindness, meanness, harsh words, etc., etc., etc. The countless sins that are there requires an abundant amount of forgiveness for everybody. We're not sure what the psalm writer was thinking about when he recognized that God had enough forgiveness. Was he a bad, sinful person? Or was he one who just lives their life every day with these countless bad thoughts, unkindnesses, harsh words, all the kinds of things that require more and more of God's abundant forgiveness. Now, there's another issue in the scripture, the New Testament scripture, and that is that somebody was saying, well, Jesus, you're going crazy, and your mom and your siblings are out there. Why don't you go home? Remember hearing that? Why don't you go home? And Jesus says, this is my mother and my sibling. What do you mean, go home? And I want to tell you something about Bloom. Home is where you are safe. Home is where you are inspired and nurtured and cared for. And when Jesus looked out on the people upon whom he was ministering, he said, this is safe. This is inspiring. This is nurturing. This is caring. It's home. It's mother. It's siblings. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that this place is safe, nurturing, caring, and inspiring. You are family, mother and siblings and father and caring and grandparents and all that creates a family that gives us hope and a strong future. So now, I ask that you go out into the world from here and treat the world as family. I ask you to go out into the world now and find the good means for the good ends. And I invite you to go out into the world covered and protected by God's abundant forgiveness. Amen.